I want to talk to you today about a problem that I believe is very important to my community here in Sittingbourne and Sheppey. It relates to the procurement of food by the prison service. Up until a few years ago, local suppliers were able to supply their produce to the prisons here in my own constituency. The government then changed the policy and introduced a national contract with a company called 3663, of whom I have no problem. But what it has meant is that our local suppliers are suffering economically because they're no longer able to supply the prisons. The prisons themselves would like to enter contracts with local suppliers because they themselves feel that they are part of the community there. I raised this matter in Parliament recently, and I was given one of the reasons for moving to a national contract was to ensure that the quality of food supplied to prisons and prisoners met acceptable standards. And one of the arguments that was put forward at that time by the Minister, and I'd like just to quickly read it to you. One of the arguments put forward was that an undersized apple handed out at the servery will create issues of order and control. So we use suppliers that are sensitive to that need and that use their sourcing ability to maintain consistency from their supply base. Now, setting aside all the verbiage in there, what they're effectively saying is that they have to use a national supplier because they're frightened that the prisoners will be given the wrong size apples. Well, I asked the question of the Minister in Parliament, and I said, would the Minister explain to me how a Braeburn apple that comes from Upchurch in my constituency is any worse for prisoners than a French Golden Delicious that comes from France? The Minister had no reply, but it actually has got a very serious point, and is this within the government, DEFRA, Department of Food and Agriculture, actually produced figures that show how much each department in government spends on indigenous produce. And within the prison service, it shows that orchard fruit, not a single solitary apple, pear or plum is actually produced or procured from the United Kingdom. It all comes from overseas. Similarly, soft fruit, which covers strawberries and other fruit, not a single piece of fruit comes from this country. Poultry, only 2% of the poultry used in our prisons is actually reared here in the United Kingdom. And bacon, not a single ration of bacon served in our prisons comes from the United Kingdom. Now that, I believe, is quite scandalous. I think that it is one of the responsibilities of government to set a good example. And how can we expect consumers to buy British if the government doesn't do it? And I'm urging ministers, and I will continue to urge them, to actually instruct their officials in their procurement departments to actually buy British. It is British taxpayers' money that's being spent on this food, and I believe that British taxpayers would prefer their money to be spent to help British farmers rather than foreign farmers. I shall be pursuing this issue over the coming months. Thank you for listening to me.